I come from a small town in Texas, and when I was there as a creative at Texas A&M, I always was like, man, one day I'm gonna live in a big city and I'm gonna go to Creative Mornings, and that's gonna be so cool. And finally, I moved to the big city, and I'm speaking at Creative Mornings. So, yeah, thank you so much for coming. You're all a part of this. And I noticed a lot of you wearing green today. I'm going to choose to believe that that was a conscious choice to support me, so thank you very much. Okay, so I want to start today with a demonstration more than a slide. As I do this, I want you to get in touch with your emotions. I know it's a little early to do that, but identify how you feel. Don't judge your emotions. Don't say anything. Just examine how you feel, okay? So I'm going to take this flag. So, how are you feeling in this moment? It's probably a little uncomfortable for some of you. How do you feel about me as someone who did this? If I were to do that, did that give you anxiety? I can almost guarantee that what you don't feel is nothing, right? But it's totally okay what I've done. This is not an American flag. This is a 51-star flag. We sell these at flagsforgood.com. We support DC statehood because there's 750,000 people in this country who cannot vote, and they're taxed without representation. So this flag does not apply to the U.S. flag code that doesn't let it touch the ground. And the reason I know that is because Disney World does this every single day. Okay, I'm gonna put this over here. Don't cancel me for this. Okay. So Disney World, all of the flags you see on top of all the buildings in Main Street, USA, they don't follow the flag code because they don't want to take the time to take it down when it rains every day, or they want to take it down at night. So those flags have like 12 stripes, or they have 45 stars, or something that makes them not official American flags, so that they can be lazy about it, and that's fine. So I bring this up, and I did that purely to show you that you care about flags. Even if you don't think you do, you do. And you probably see 100 flags a day. Don't give them a second thought, but I hope that changes after this. So I've loved flags for a very long time. When I was a little kid, we traveled a lot. I was fascinated just by their colors, by their shape, their sense of place that they create, the different rules around them. Then I went to college, and I studied design, and I started liking flags from a design perspective and a communication perspective. But I always thought that there's no full-time career in vexillology. So I just let it be my side passion, my little nerdy thing that I knew too much about, which all of us hopefully have. And that was until very recently in 2020, when 3 things happened that completely changed my life. First of all, the pandemic. All of us were sitting at home, working from home, right? So we all had a lot more free time. I had also done a small TEDx talk at Texas A&M, which is actually smaller than this. And so when TED couldn't have their conference in 2020, they were like, hey, can we take this talk and elevate it to TED.com? And I was like, oh, yeah. And they said, do you have a call to action link to send people to after they watch your talk? And I was like, shit, no. What do I want to send people to? I don't even know. And then at the same time, George Floyd was murdered and the BLM movement was raging. I, as a liberal person, wanted a BLM flag. Very few were made. You can see most people had cardboard signs and things. In 2020, if you dare to think back to that time, the political right had the lock on the medium of flags. And so I was frantically Googling, can I please find a flag company that doesn't print Confederate flags as well? I just wanted a BLM flag from somebody who gave a shit. Could not find one. So I said, you know what? Maybe this is the moment where I can let my passion meet the moment, and I can make BLM flags, give a shit, donate portions of the sales of those flags to the movement, and that was my pandemic project. I started with 6 designs, 5 BLM flags. One of them was a climate change is real flag because I just wanted it for myself. And that's how I started it in my spare bedroom. I thought it was going to be a 2-week project, and it just has not ended since. Because right after all of that was the 2020 election. We started making vote flags. We don't tell you who to vote for. We just tell you to vote. We just don't make red ones, okay? So even to this day, we only make flags we believe in. We donate a portion to a relevant cause or charity. Now, if you go to our website, you can choose where your donation goes to, which is a lot of fun. So that's what we do till this day, though we've grown from that bedroom to now having an office here at 16 Tech, 3 employees, which I think are watching on the live stream. They chose not to come because they're like, we hear you say this shit every day. We don't need to hear you. So yeah, we've grown, and then I've gotten to do, we've blown up on TikTok. Like 12 million people have seen me blab about flags, which is crazy. And then I got to do another TEDx talk in Utah, which we're going to talk a lot about. But every time I do a talk, I start with the same exact quote. And this quote, I think, is more fitting for this audience because it's from brand designer Wally Ollins, one of the best in the game. Wally Ollins said, branding is simply just that people want to belong. And they want to display symbols of belonging. That's branding. And of course, to me, that's also flags. I think they're one and the same. And that's why my blog is called Branding the Nations, because really, flags are brands. And that is why when the flag was put on the ground, you feel something. Because yes, it's a piece of cloth and it doesn't really matter. But what it is the only tangible symbol of the abstract idea of a nation, of your identity. So when someone disrespects a flag, it feels like they're disrespecting you, when they're not really, but that's how it feels. So flags are a great diving board to talk about all kinds of topics like nationalism, pride, design, communication, things like this. But I want to talk today about personal identity and use flags to sort of look at personal identity, because I feel like we are in the midst of one of the greatest shifts of human identity that possibly our species will ever face. So I'm going to start close to home here in Indianapolis. So I moved here 3 years ago. I'm still a Newser, as they say. As I got to know Indianapolis, of course, I started looking into the history of the flag. So the first flag of Indianapolis was started in 1911. No one has ever seen it. It was unveiled. No one came to the unveiling because the president was in town. They had better things to do. And so the Indy Star wrote an article about it. They didn't take pictures of it. They just described what it was. So I took that article and I recreated what it said to possibly the only rendering of the Indianapolis flag that anyone's ever seen. I've never shown this slide before. That is probably what the first Indianapolis flag looked like. That didn't last very long. In 1915, they designed a second flag, which was this. Oh, yeah, all right. These are my people. These are designers in here. So this flag sucks for a lot of reasons. In fact, it sucks so bad that they designed it in 1915, but they didn't create a physical flag until 1960. 40 years, they were just like, well, it's their flag, whatever. The stars represent pieces of the city council or something. So this might be the only flag in the world that there's a star that represents like the sewer system and the public works. So this didn't last very long. So in 1962, they decided, hey, let's have a contest. Let's find us a flag that represents Indy. So they started a thing. Anybody could submit. This professor at Heron Art School decided, hey, free assignment. He assigned all of his students, hey, design a flag for this contest. And 18-year-old Roger Gohl won the contest with this design. And that's him giving the chairman the design. And it's simply kind of what we see today, but not exactly what we see today. As you might notice, the star and the monument circle is off-centered on his original design. Roger got his $50. He went to lunch with the mayor, and then he went off to finish school in California. Didn't think much about this ever afterwards. He came back in 1969 and saw that the first physical flag flying, and they had just shifted it to the center, not asked him. Doesn't know why. Nobody knows why. But he didn't really care. And that's kind of who Roger was. He just recently passed away. I had a weird relationship with him. I moved to Indy. I was like, I'm going to find who designed the flag. And I called him out of the blue. He lived in California for 50-something years. He was like, who are you? And he was fascinated that somebody actually cared about flags enough to give him a call. So after our first conversation, he texted me, which awesome that an 80-year-old texted, right? He texted me and he said, hey, do you want the flag? Because I found the original school project that I did. And I said, no, Roger. That belongs in a museum. Don't you dare put that in the hands of the U.S. Postal Service. But he said, well, I already put it in the mail, and I put some cardboard with it. It's fine. So he put Omaha Steaks cardboard in there. And he gave me all the provenance as well. So here's the original Indianapolis flag. And he wrote a little note on it. It says, so it's your turn to take care of this now, and I'm pleased that it'll be yours. Handle with care. So yeah, and that's the original Indy flag. Jumping ahead a little bit, Flags for Good, we're opening our first physical space, hopefully by the end of the year, right by Side Door Bagel across the street on 10th and Mass. So, thank you. So this will be on permanent display. It will have a home back in Indiana for the first time in 50 years. It'll, people can come and see and learn about the flag. So that is now the 8th best city flag in the country, according to the North American Vexillological Association, which I'm a proud member. But it probably won't stay the 8th for very long because there's a lot of cities and states that are redesigning their flags. Like Evansville just redesigned their flag, Terre Haute's in the process. So we've got some competition coming up. I don't know if y'all have paid attention, but 3 states have changed their state flags very recently. Does anybody? Okay, it's big in the flag world. I don't know if normal people actually care. So Mississippi was the first to change their flag. Can anybody guess why? Good on them. They changed it to this, which we're going to give it a B- because we're designers in here. This still has words on the flag, which is like rule number 1, don't do that. It's still a little detailed. But hey, points for getting rid of Confederate symbolism. Minnesota changed their flag this year. This was one of the worst state flags out there. It's way too much color. The symbolism in the seal was racist. So they changed it to this beauty. All right. I agree. And so we're calling this the glow up of the century. And then Utah. And let's talk about Utah. So when I started Flags for Good, I quickly realized, wait a second, I have the ability to make any flag I want, and no one can stop me. So I can do what I've always wanted to do as a kid and just redesign all of the bad state flags and just make them. So that's what I did. For instance, Colorado, real quick, lovely flag, A-. I think most people in this room can identify what's wrong with this. It's these stupid points of the C. Why don't they just touch the white line? For the love of God. So that's what we did. So I just changed it, and we sell this. And then I went deep, and I actually did the math from the law that designs the flag, and I did an entire YouTube video about it that the governor watched, and he still won't talk to me. So go watch that on YouTube. And anyway, let's go back to Utah. So who's been to Utah? Good. Place is gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful places in our country. So I loved it. I'd been so many times. I was so inspired by it. I was like, cool, I can make a great flag for Utah. So I started with the red earth of southern Utah. Out of that comes the White Mountains, the best snow on earth. There's 5 of them for the 5 indigenous tribes, the 5 national parks. And then Utah has a lot of beehive symbolism it's a Mormon symbol. So instead of putting the beehive and being too on the nose, I put just a hexagon, like a honeycomb. And so that was my better state flag of Utah. And I started selling it, and I got asked to do a TEDx talk at Utah State and did that and showed it. And everybody was like, oh, yay. At the same day, this random coincidence, the government of Utah said, we're going to redesign our flag officially. So I was like, cool. I waited for the submission window to open where anybody could submit a design, submitted my design, and then I just waited patiently like everybody else to see what would happen. Except I didn't do that. I bought billboards all over Salt Lake City. So if you've never looked at the price of digital billboards, it is criminally cheap. Okay, so... And the senator in charge of the commission tweeted at Flags for Good, did I just see a billboard? So this design became one of the 70 finalists that they then took and sort of culled all of those designs into one amalgamation. This is what they ended up with. Um, you know, there's some things I would change, but and so then of course in true Flags for Good fashion, we had to make a pride version because that's what we do here. So where am I going with this? There's always people who hate change for change's sake. They don't care what it's changing to. They just don't like change. And every flag redesign faces dissidents. The people in Utah really thought that this was a bad deal. They latched on to the fact that my design was similar. I had done YouTube videos. I had done the TED Talk. So they were like, oh, there's a conspiracy. And that this liberal guy from Indiana is coming in and taking our heritage. They started videos trying to red string us, me and the senator together. I was likened to Hitler. Said we were worshiping the goddess of rainbows, which sounds dope. And then I was called the Antichrist of progressiveness, which is a moniker I like to wear proudly now. So you will always face turmoil when you try to change things. And this just shows you that people care about flags. They care about their identity. And sometimes when you do these changes, it feels like you're trampling on them, which obviously that's not true. Speaking of flag changes, does anybody know what this one is? I'll give my little pin to who can name this flag. Thank you very much. This is not the Confederate flag. This is the Confederate battle flag. Sorry. Almost hit someone in the face with a pin. I'm sorry. So this is the flag of the Army of Northern Virginia. This never once represented the Confederate States of America as their flag. So if your neighbor is flying this up in Indiana, which I do see, it's weird, you can tell them, hey, this is not your heritage. You're wrong. And a vexillologist told me this. The state of Georgia had this as their flag for the longest time. And I think it's pretty clear that they didn't design this flag because they wanted everybody to feel welcome. They did this to show who was in power and who was not. In 2001, they changed it to something I say is even worse because it keeps the old flag on there, but then it adds a bunch of just bad design. So luckily, this only lasted a year. And they had a referendum, and now this is their current flag. So hopefully the question ringing in your ears is, wait a second, if that wasn't the Confederate flag, if that wasn't the flag of the Confederate States of America, what was? And it's that. So to this day, Georgia flies the flag of the Confederacy. They just slapped their state seal in the middle of it. And I leave these slides in because I'm just like, I feel like more people need to be talking about this. And if there's a next state that's going to change their state flag, let's give the bouquet to Georgia, right? I haven't designed a better version yet because I haven't thought of something good enough. Maybe somebody here will. Maybe somebody watching online will. But let's get this done. Okay, hard transition. What is my favorite flag? Usually in Q&A this comes up. So I always say that my favorite flag is Canada. Not because it's a beautiful country with beautiful people and a beautiful prime minister. It's because the Canadian flag is one of the greatest rebrands in design history, I think. So, like most British colonial things, this was their flag. This was like America's flag too before we kicked them out. But they kept this until the 1960s. The Liberal Party in Canada was like, hey, let's have a cool flag that, represents us, and it doesn't tie so much to the British crown or whatever. The Conservative Party said, oh, no, and same story over and over again. So they started a campaign that Canada needs a flag, and they had what they called the Great Canadian Flag Debate. And if I had a time machine, this would be probably where I'd go back to. This is the coolest room, I think, in the world. So the Great Canadian Flag Debate lasted 6 months. In parliamentary history, this was the longest debate in Canadian parliament history. They got socialized healthcare quicker than their flag, okay? But they came up with what I think is one of the best flags on earth. And the reason, how do we measure success in design or with flags or whatever? I think it's twofold. It's longevity and staying power of a brand, but also good design always trickles down. And you can see that it was 1965 when they adopted it, but in a few short years, all of these Canadian brands and companies started adopting this maple leaf, sometimes completely unchanged. They just took it off the flag and slapped it on their logo because they knew that there's power in a good symbol, and they wanted to align their brand with the inherent power of the flag. Even one of the biggest brands on earth, McDonald's, if you go to McDonald's in Canada, they always have a maple leaf in the middle of the Golden Arches, if you can believe it. I can't believe America hasn't adopted this somehow. So that's that, but it's not just nations that do this. Our friends up north in Chicago, they have probably the greatest city flag in the world. It's gorgeous, and their city took the flag, took the design elements from it, and they built an entire brand guide for their city, their public works. As a designer and as a flag nerd, this is just my jam. They did like a live stream on Twitter, and they used the blue stripes as underlines, and it's just chef's kiss. But that's not to say Indy, don't sleep on Indy. We're using our flag as well. And yeah, there's a lot of people in here who design stuff for Indianapolis, and like, hey, let's keep going. Let's use this flag more. But when you have a good flag, design will trickle down to the things below it. But what happens when you don't have a good flag? Who is the anti-Chicago? New York City, right? Can anybody think of New York City's flag? No. People who live in New York City can't think of New York City's flag because nobody sees it because it's a piece of crap. As is the flag of New York State. These are both awful flags design-wise, I should say. So if someone from New York City wants to get a tattoo and they want to display symbols of belonging to the city that they love, what tattoo do they get? Exactly. It's a jumbo. I Googled it. It's a bunch. So Yankee symbol, very popular. I Heart New York, Big Apple, the skyline, the Statue of Liberty. They have a fractured brand identity. And as designers, that hurts us at our heart. But I think they're doing okay in New York City. But as we think about this, about our identities and how we display our symbols of belonging, I have a question for you here, which is, where do you actually live? And I know Indianapolis is the quick answer, but think about it. Where do you live your life? This question, I think, is getting harder and harder to answer. Because think back like 50 years. Two people who live in Indianapolis 50 years ago, they probably went to the same grocery store. They probably watched the same television programs at the same time on the same channel as everyone in that time zone. They probably worked for the same large employer here in Indy, went to the same gas station. Their lives, their lived experience was homogenous. But today, my lived experience compared to my neighbor could not be farther from, different. Like, I get my groceries delivered. We watch the news that we feel fits our preconceived notions of the world now. We don't watch the same news. We watch shows on our time whenever we want. We can work for companies across the country. Literally, one of the only things that I think me and my neighbor have in common is what weather we experience when we walk outside and who we pay taxes to. And who wants to fly a flag for weather and taxes, right? So if you think about your lived experience, it is becoming less and less rooted in where you lay your head at night. My generation, going off to another state to go to college, then to go move across the country to get a job, and then 2 years later move across the country again, that's normal. And the roots that we're planting are so shallow that the question of where are you from is really hard to answer. And so I think we're in the largest shift of human identity possibly in our species' history because of two things. If our identity is birthed out of our lived experience, we are becoming hypermobile and hyper-connected. And so the things like cities, states, countries, those things are less and less part of our identity structure. And these amorphous things like sexuality, bioregion, like this Appalachian flag up there, your race, things like that, these identities that have soft boundaries, they're becoming more important than our cities and our states, and even our nations. America is not immune from this because, anybody know this flag? Estonia, thank you. You didn't know this was going to be a flag quiz today. So Estonia was one of the first countries in the world to offer e-citizenship, where I could go get an e-citizenship in Estonia. I could open up Flags for Good EU. I could have a warehouse there, a bank account there. I could operate in the EU as an EU citizen, and I could never step foot in Estonia. Now, why would they do that? Well, this highlights a very important point that we don't talk about enough. It's that governments are just service providers, okay? There is nothing stopping us from getting to the point where we will subscribe to one nationality and then change to another. Our friends will be another because they offer different services that we might want for our lives, different tax structures, different healthcare, etc. How do I know this? Because the rich have been doing this forever. They will move to Monaco and not pay taxes. So countries like Estonia are finally getting smart and realizing, oh, there's a demand for this, for everyone. So I'm going to take this one step further. It's possibly a step too far, but it's 9 a.m., let's do it. I come to believe that pageantry, patriotism, flyovers, anthems, all of these things are just ways that the government is distracting us from the fact that they are just a service provider, and soon you will have options. Because when you create a bunch of taboos around the flag, it makes wanting change feel way more wrong, right? So anyway, I'll get off my horse on that one. But we are in the middle of the largest shift of human identity I think we'll ever see. And it's because we're coming to understand that our identities are now in our power. We have more power to define them than ever before. And we're starting to wake up to the fact that our society was built to benefit some identities and to push down some identities. And we're working to fix that, which is awesome. We're working towards a future where there is a full convergence with hyperconnectivity and hypermobility, to where our identities and cultures, they're all going to be mixed up, and that's cool. I don't think we can turn back anymore. We're heading that way. But until we get to that point where we are right now today, we're in the messy middle, where we take swings at the future we want to see, and sometimes they're too far, sometimes they're too short. Samson Livingston, a lot of you probably know him. Is he here today? No? Okay, you should all go on a walk and talk. But he's quoted as saying, we have to be as intentional about the reparative work that we're doing now as they were when they were starting the discrimination, right? What does this mean for flags? There is a day coming when you walk into a coffee shop and they won't have to hang a pride flag in there to show that LGBT people are safe in that coffee shop. Why? Because LGBT people will be safe in all spaces. There's a day coming where Flags for Good doesn't have to make Black Lives Matter flags, because Black lives will matter as much as anybody else's. But until that day, we are using flags to create the world that we want to see. We're in that middle ground here. So when I look at Flags for Good and I look at what we choose to create and what flags we choose not to create, there is a common thread, and I ask myself this question all the time. Because flags are not just pieces of cloth. They're tools to create inclusion and identity in safe spaces. And if I see a flag and I think this could create a space where someone feels more included where they weren't before, then yes, that is a flag for good, and that's something that we should make. Because in the end, people just want to belong, and they want to display symbols of belonging, and we shouldn't rob anybody of that. I wanted to end just talking a little bit about my identity since I moved here. I like to say that I moved to Indy because of a series of unfortunate events. Didn't choose to come here. But over the time that I've stayed, and believe me, I looked at leaving so many times. But I stayed, and I kept meeting cool people, and I kept finding cool things and cool stores, and I'm just like, man, this place is underrated. This is really cool. I kept seeing this phrase, maybe it's a Midwestern thing, I don't know, but it's a bloom where you're planted, right? You see that everywhere. I didn't get to choose where I was planted, but I sure as hell am going to bloom here. And I hope that a lot of you will choose to do the same, because, you know, maybe Samson's the only person that thinks that Indy's the greatest place on earth, right? There's a lot of work to be done here. And we could, Flags for Good probably does belong in bluer pastures, just move out to Boulder and whatever, right? But I feel like Flags for Good belongs in a place where it can do more good. And that's what we've chosen to do, is to stay here, to plant roots, to tell the story of Indianapolis, and then also help make the next chapter of Indianapolis even better. And so I hope you will all join us in that. You will come to our new store when we open it, hopefully by the end of the year. And thank you so much.